Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Before we begin the discussion of today's The Hindu newspaper, we have an important announcement. This Saturday, that is on the 16th of September at 6 p.m., we shall be conducting an exclusive workshop on the BYJU'S Exam Prep app. I will be taking a session on understanding the syllabus for UPSC Civil Services Examination. So those who want to get a deeper understanding of the UPSC syllabus and how to approach your preparation, how to plan your preparation for the upcoming exam, those students can attend the workshop and the link for the workshop will be provided in the description box below. So with this, let's begin with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. From the newspaper today, from the Delhi edition, I have chosen 11 important articles. 5 of these articles require a detailed analysis, which is more relevant for the mains exam. And we have another 6 articles that are extremely important for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics one by one, and I'll ensure that the discussion will be comprehensive and detailed. The whole purpose of the news analysis is to help you read the newspaper easily. You don't have to go back and go through the newspaper again. And the whole idea is to help you cover as many topics as possible. So if you guys are liking the initiative, do support us by pressing the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also head to our Telegram channel because we share a quiz on these topics as soon as the session ends. That will help you revise these articles again. So let's begin with the first topic from page number 1. In fact, this topic, the Nipah virus disease, it has not just been reported on the first page, but there are few related articles on other pages as well. We even have an editorial on this important topic. So first, let's understand the context. Why is this topic in news? In the last few days, there has been a big development in Kerala. Another outbreak of Nipah virus disease has been reported, and unfortunately, 2 deaths have already occurred. The Kerala Health Department, which is closely monitoring the developments, has already reported 5 more cases, clearly indicating human-to-human transmission of the disease. So as per established protocols, while tackling infectious contagious diseases, contact tracing has already been carried out, and more than 700 contacts who had come in touch with the infected patients, they have been identified, and accordingly precautionary measures, containment measures are being implemented. So this highlights the risk posed by infectious emerging zoonotic diseases such as the Nipah virus infection. Kerala in particular has been very vulnerable to the Nipah outbreaks, and this is not the first time it is happening. In the last few years, there have been 4 major outbreaks in Kerala itself. And the most dangerous part about Nipah infection is that it has a very high mortality rate. This is a concern that has been flagged even by the World Health Organization. Even though the spread of the disease is very limited, its infection rate is very limited, its high mortality rate is a concern. In the outbreaks that we have seen around the world, there are few regions in the world which are primarily affected by Nipah outbreaks. So wherever we have come across these outbreaks, the mortality rate has been in the range of 70 to 80%, which is extremely high for a contagious disease. In the 4 recent outbreaks in Kerala, almost 90% of the infected patients lost their lives. So given the high mortality rate, it is very important to pay attention to such outbreaks. Because any further mutations, any further improvement in its reproductive rate and infection rate could easily turn this into a deadly epidemic or even a potential pandemic. Right? The world has just come out of one such nightmare, and the last thing we want is another global outbreak. So WHO has flagged Nipah as a major concern. It is treated as a bioagent, stage 4. It's classified as a bioagent, which is a threat for biosafety, which means utmost precautions have to be taken when handling this particular pathogen. So let's understand more about Nipah virus infection. Let's get into the details. In Kerala, the outbreak is already showing signs of a larger spread, and the cases are being primarily reported in the Kozhikode district. So wherever the cases have come up, they have been declared as containment zones, and the local health officials, along with the administrative officials, they have been put on task to quickly contain the spread of the disease. According to reports coming from Kerala, the Kerala Health Minister has stated that this outbreak, the latest outbreak in Kerala, is linked to the Bangladesh strain of the virus, which apparently has a very low infection rate. But however, it has a very high mortality rate. This is the concern that I was flagging. Even though its infection rate is less, the rate at which it spreads is lesser, the high mortality rate raises the risk and the concern regarding Nipah disease. So let's understand what is Nipah virus infection. It is essentially a zoonotic viral infection caused by the Nipah virus. So when we say it's a zoonotic infection, it means it's making a jump from animals to humans. There is a transmission happening from certain animals or birds, and it's jumping to human beings, and that is called a zoonotic disease, where you find the pathogen jumping from the animal world, right, or even from birds to human beings. And once humans are infected, we have seen cases where human-to-human transmission is also possible. So let's figure out what are the symptoms and through what route does Nipah transmit. Are there any reservoir hosts? So based on this, how do we manage and contain the future outbreaks and the current incident in Kerala? How do we tackle these outbreaks? So human-to-human transmission is possible, but fortunately it happens only when there is very close contact. When a person comes in very close contact with an infected person, only then the transmission can occur. Only then human-to-human transmission is possible. But where exactly is the zoonotic jump happening? That is a question. And what exactly are the symptoms? According to WHO, infected patients, they display symptoms such as fever, headache, cough, sore throat, which is very similar to any respiratory disease or influenza or flu. But as the disease progresses, the infected person might start reporting breathing difficulty and even experience vomiting. If the disease progresses from here, it will turn into a severe case, leading to disorientation, drowsiness, seizures, and it even causes encephalitis, which is inflammation or enlargement of the brain, swelling of the brain, that can push the patient into a coma and eventual death. So this is where the disease gets extremely dangerous. Its mortality rate is very, very high. So if you look at the origin of this disease, right, it's more of a new emerging zoonotic disease. The first outbreak of Nipah was reported in 1998-1999 in Southeast Asia. This is where it originated from. In fact, the name Nipah is based on a village in Malaysia where the first outbreak has been documented, where the first case of zoonotic transmission happened to human beings. So it's named after this village called Nipah in Malaysia. This is where the first major outbreak was seen. In Singapore and few parts of Southeast Asia, a subsequent outbreak was noticed, following which outbreaks have been seen in South Asia as well, especially in Bangladesh and as well as in India. And that too in India, few states in particular, that is West Bengal and Kerala, they have been the most affected. We have seen repeated outbreaks of Nipah in Bangladesh, in West Bengal and in Kerala, and also in parts of Southeast Asia. So this is where Nipah outbreaks have been limited as of now, in the last 2 decades or so. Studies have clearly established that the animal host reservoir is the fruit bat, or also commonly known as the flying fox. As you know, bats especially, they are a reservoir of various dangerous viruses and pathogens, and the fruit bat in particular is the primary host reservoir in case of the Nipah virus. So when humans come in contact with the bat itself, or its saliva or its urine or droppings, that is when the virus makes a zoonotic jump. And also, the virus is known to jump to other animals as well through bats. It is known to infect pigs, dogs, cats, goats, cattle, sheep and horse, etc. So these fruit bats, they consume various fruits, they consume the natural sap that is produced in trees, right? So those who come in contact with these contaminated fruits or the sap of the tree, they are at high risk of catching the infection. Or those who come in contact with the saliva, the urine, the excreta of the bat, right? Or those who get in touch with the carcass of a bat which has died following a infection, right? They are bound to see a jump. You see a zoonotic jump happening when humans come in direct contact with the infected fruit bat and its fluids and droppings. So from here, you can see human-to-human transmission occurring, but fortunately, it occurs only with close contact. Only if a person comes in close contact with the infected patient, only then a human-to-human transmission has been seen. So in West Bengal and Kerala, we have seen multiple outbreaks, and in the last few years itself, Kerala has seen some 4 outbreaks. But fortunately, the spread of the disease, as I pointed out, is much slower compared to other dangerous epidemics and pandemics. Even if you compare to SARS coronavirus 2 or COVID-19, the spread of Nipah is relatively slow due to the difficulty involved in transmission, in human-to-human transmission, right? But the high mortality rate is the serious concern. Most of them who get infected, they end up getting killed by the disease. And this is where the concern comes up. This is where health authorities, governments have to take the threat as seriously as possible. So till now, what has favored us is the low R0 number, the reproductive number, which determines that how many people does an infected person impact, right? How many other people are catching the infection from one infected source, right? That is the R0, the reproductive number of a virus. This is pretty low. It's a very low number at 0.48, which means less than one person is getting infected by one infected patient. In case of COVID-19, for example, and other epidemics, pandemics we have seen, R0 number would be 1, 1.5 or 2 or even above that, which means each infected person was spreading the disease to more than one person or up to 2 people or 3 people. That is where you see an exponential rise in the cases. This does not happen in the case of Nipah because its R0 is very less. It's less than half. So less than one person is getting infected from one patient. So as it is not very infectious, it doesn't spread easily. It can be contained with the right measures. That's why most Nipah outbreaks have been localized, limited to few certain regions in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So what needs to be done is that we need to focus on preventive and containment measures because there is no vaccine and no dedicated line of treatment available for Nipah. There are no specific drugs available to treat the infection, no vaccine available to prevent, right? So in this case, only symptomatic treatment is possible. So in case of the latest outbreak, the Indian Council of Medical Research has recommended monoclonal antibody treatment, which only helps in tackling the symptoms, and then your natural immune system has to fight the disease. So when there is no vaccine and no line of treatment, the best measure is to focus on prevention and containment. So all the basic protocols have to be followed, from effective testing to contact tracing, to identify the primary, secondary contacts who have come in touch with the infected person, and following up these contacts to ensure that those who display symptoms are quarantined and tested so that the infected patients can not only be isolated, but they can also be provided with immediate treatment. At least symptomatic treatment can be provided. So rapid testing, contact tracing and containment, right, along with quarantine measures. This is the right way to go forward. But even before an outbreak occurs, there are several other steps that can be taken. There needs to be further studies to understand the dynamics of the spread of Nipah. That is what several experts have pointed out, and there is an article on page number 6 related to this. since Kerala has seen repeated outbreaks, that too in the same region, most of the outbreaks have been in and around Kozhikode. So there are certain geographical and local factors that are contributing to the spread. This could include agricultural activities. It could include local customs and other man-made activities as well, where humans are getting in touch with fruit bats, causing this outbreak and spread. So there needs to be further studies to understand the ecological dynamics through which the virus is making the zoonotic jump again and again, and how it is spreading in one particular region. So this requires detailed studies. It requires better surveillance at the ground level. It requires right investments in epidemiology. Now that Kerala has dealt with such outbreaks, including COVID-19, right, the basic measures have to be put in place to further study how exactly the zoonotic jump is happening. So based on that, a lot of measures can be taken to spread awareness amongst the people to not consume fruits or thus not get in touch with sap and those trees where fruit bats might be in contact. In several cases, it has been noticed that the initial patients who got infected, they would have consumed those fruits which were partially eaten by fruit bats, meaning they came in touch with the saliva of the fruit bat, thus contracting the virus. Or they would have come in touch with those trees and the sap which is infected, contaminated with the saliva, urine and feces of the bat. Right? So this is where the transmission is occurring. So the exact ecological dynamics has to be established through scientific studies. This is what the editorial is pointing out as well on page number 8. The editorial is pointing out that Kerala should be on the guard. It should be taking even more proactive measures, given that it has seen multiple outbreaks, that too during certain specific seasons. Until now, it had been assumed by the Kerala Health Department that outbreaks are seen during the breeding season of the fruit bat. The breeding season of fruit bat is usually between December to March, and there was an assumption that the outbreaks are mainly happening during breeding season when the numbers of the fruit bats are increasing. But this is not true because the latest outbreak we are seeing is in August and September. So there are other factors, local factors, geographical factors, right, which are contributing to the zoonotic jump. Definitely anthropogenic activity plays a role, especially agricultural activity. The farmers, right, they might be climbing the trees or harvesting certain fruits, or maybe the children in a region are consuming certain fruits in a given season, where they are coming in contact with the contaminated fruits and the other contaminants related to the fruit bat. So these factors have to be specifically established through epidemiological studies and ecological dynamic studies. Based on that, an integrated approach has to be designed. An integrated approach to prevent and contain the future outbreaks. It is possible to prevent and contain such outbreaks, but it requires further studies and the required protocols have to be established. Is that clear? So if the outbreaks occur, then of course the focus should be on treatment, isolation, etc. But this requires a local decentralized approach where the primary health centers at the ward level, at the panchayat level, they should play a key role and a direct role in containing the spread of such diseases. Given that we have seen the impact of epidemics and pandemics, we need to take these measures, and the government of India and even WHO needs to assist the government of Kerala in these efforts. So this is a very, very important topic. You can not only expect prelims questions here, you can even expect a possible mains question on this topic. Now let's move on to the next article. We have a column on page number 8 written by Krishna Kumar, a former director of NCERT. In this article, the writer is talking about pedagogic ethics. He is focusing on the professionalism, the conduct, and the ethical values of a teacher and how it impacts a student. Because see, recently there was a very disturbing incident in Uttar Pradesh. Many of you might have seen this viral video where a school teacher was asking the classmates to beat up a fellow student, right? And it appeared to be a communal discrimination where a student of a particular community was being targeted and the whole class was being asked to slap this particular student for committing a trivial mistake. This points to the deep-rooted problems that exist in our education system. The writer is pointing out how the bond between teachers and students has broken down. He points out that professionalism and ethical conduct amongst teachers has fallen rapidly, and the governments have a direct blame. They are to be directly blamed for the current situation in our education system, especially at the primary level. In India, we have a dedicated day to honor and pay respect to the teachers, the 5th of September. We have a separate day for children's, that is 14th of November, right? But the writer is saying we've forgotten the bond. We've forgotten to focus on the bond between teacher and students. We have forgotten to focus on teacher training, on focusing on quality of teaching, not just the quality of content, but also the values, the ethics that are imbibed into teachers, because teachers have a huge impact on students and the society. So this is the focus of the article. The writer is pointing out that under the RTE Act, the Right to Education Act, certain indicators of teacher training, teacher quality has been identified. For the first time, through a legal constitutional measure, teacher training, teacher quality became the focus, and it also prioritizes professionalism and professional conduct amongst teachers. What teachers say, how they teach, how they behave, right? And do they have the ability to be unbiased? Do they have the ability to be empathetic? Can they keep away all the social biases? And can they train the students to tackle social evils that are present in the society? That is the crux of teacher quality training. So RTE Act does deal with this issue. It lays out some indicators of quality focused on teacher training and teacher professionalism. But unfortunately in India, we haven't seen effective implementation. Few states, they had taken some steps initially following the RTE Act to prioritize teacher training with focus on morals, professionalism and ethics of the teacher as well. A lot of attention was paid to teacher recruitment to ensure quality teachers are recruited. Not just based on their skills and content, but also based on their ethical values. But the COVID-19 pandemic and the lack of support from the center has derailed these initiatives. The pandemic dealt a severe impact to education system in India. It disrupted regular education. Plus, state governments and the central government over a period of time have lost focus on teacher training and teacher professionalism. So this is where the writer is urging the regulatory body, the National Council for Teacher Education, to pay more attention to the aspect of teacher training. Given these incidents, which highlight the lack of professional conduct by teachers, the lack of ethical conduct by teachers, teacher training and teacher quality becomes extremely important as part of the pedagogic skills. Apart from the teaching skills and the content that's being delivered by a teacher, it's also equally important to focus on their professionalism, their ethical and moral values as well, because they are imbibing that to the students and the society itself. In 2008, the Supreme Court had established a commission to deal with this issue. It had established a commission under Justice J.S. Verma to examine the issue of teacher training in the country. And the Justice J.S. Verma committee submitted a wonderful report in 2012, but unfortunately the recommendations have largely not been implemented. The government has not accepted most of the recommendations. They have been lying around, even though very good recommendations were provided by the committee to focus on teacher training and teacher professionalism. Most of these suggestions, they remain lying, they are dormant, they have not been incorporated into teacher training and teacher education. Recently, the Supreme Court was looking at a similar case where the quality of teacher training at primary level was under question. Here, the Supreme Court observed that most states have made a practice of appointing B.Ed degree holders for teaching primary students. Usually B.Ed holders who hold a Bachelor of Education, right? They are mainly for secondary classes, secondary education. But for primary level schools, for teaching primary level kids, you need a different set of ethical code and professional training right? You need a different set of teachers. And this is where the National Council for Teacher Education has been falling short in implementing the regulatory framework. Most states, they fast track teacher recruitment, right? Since it's a major electoral issue as well, they drive recruitment on a large scale and they recruit everyone, right, who is interested, and they don't really focus much on the professional aspect, on the professional conduct of the teachers. So the poor recruitment, the poor checks and balances, the poor enforcement of the regulatory measures has directly contributed to the deterioration in teacher quality and teacher professionalism. In this regard, there is another important report that the writer points out. In 1980s, the D.P. Chattopadhyay Commission had been set up, which brought out one of the most important reports on teacher training and teacher quality. In fact, in post-independent India, this has to be the most important report with regard to teacher training and teacher quality. It's called the Teacher Commission Report that was tabled by the D.P. Chattopadhyay Commission. And this commission included some of the best minds of that time. Chattopadhyay himself was a philosopher with sufficient expertise in the field of teaching, right? And the committee also included several members who were widely reputed for their teaching skills, for their ethics, for their integrity. This committee brought out a report focused on teacher ethics. It highlighted how teaching standards have to be improved right from the bottom, starting with primary schools, primary level teaching. So there are fundamental flaws that exist in the way in which teachers are recruited and how teachers are used in different levels of schooling, right? So these issues have largely remained unaddressed. And the unfortunate part is that the Chattopadhyay Commission report and its recommendations also have not been implemented by the government. Even though the report was widely acclaimed, it was widely praised by several experts for giving the right attention on professionalism and ethics and conduct, right? The government has not implemented most of these recommendations and they have been lying around. The Chattopadhyay report, it gave a lot of focus on how teachers have to conduct, how they should behave themselves, what should be the teacher conduct in a classroom, right? It focused on professionalism and ethics, but none of these recommendations have been implemented. So given these incidents which happen every now and then, right, where corporal punishment is widely accepted, biased treatment of students is accepted, right? Student discrimination is being practiced by teachers. There are cases where there has been caste-based, religion-based discrimination, right? So these are basic social issues that we need to deal with in our education system as well, that too from the grassroots, from the primary level. So this is where the government should prioritize, focus on teacher training and teacher professionalism. Maybe we should take a relook at the RTE Act. Take a look at the Justice J.S. Verma Committee recommendations. Revive the Chattopadhyay report recommendations and try and bring them back and implement them. So the responsibility lies with the concerned organs of the state, right? So this is the argument that the writer is making in this important column. Now moving on the same page, we have another column related to biofuels. The writer is examining the complexities involved in utilization of biofuels and how we can focus on sustainable usage of biofuel to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to bring down carbon emissions. The topic is in news because of the Global Biofuels Alliance, which was one of the biggest initiatives to be launched during the recently held G20 summit. I'm sure many of you would be aware of this development. At the recently concluded G20 summit, which was hosted by India, one of the big announcements was the launch of the Global Biofuels Alliance. Right? Several countries, along with India, have launched this major initiative to promote the adoption of biofuels with the objective of reducing carbon emissions. So let's take a look at what the writer is arguing. See, today, as the world focuses on climate action, the focus is on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Because greenhouse gas emissions have been primarily responsible for global warming and the climate change that we are witnessing today. So as per the targets that countries have laid out under Paris Agreement, most countries are striving to adopt clean, renewable energy to move away from fossil fuel-based energy. And one approach we are taking, especially in the transport sector, is to adopt electric vehicles and replace ICE vehicles that are powered by internal combustion engines, which rely on fossil fuels. This has been one of the approaches, not just in India, but around the world. Right? There is a rapid transition happening towards electric hybrid vehicles, and we are trying to phase out ICE vehicles powered by internal combustion engines. Now, this approach, even though it has advantages and a lot of merits, there are a number of side effects that need to be considered. Because when it comes to electric vehicles, right, if you're planning a complete transition to electric hybrid vehicles from the current fossil fuel based vehicles, this would be a capital extensive exercise. This would generate tremendous amount of waste. It would require many critical minerals like lithium and cobalt to manufacture the batteries needed to store the electrical energy needed to power the vehicles. So this will drive up mining activities. It will result in lot of industrial activities as well, including fabrication and manufacturing. And all of them will contribute to more greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, many people have a wrong assumption that the switch to electric vehicles is all going to be clean, right? Yes, the usage of electric vehicles will be cleaner compared to internal combustion engines. Definitely, carbon emissions will go down. But in making the transition, the changes that will happen across the economy, across the industry, will contribute to several unanticipated emissions. It could cause large-scale deforestation because of increased mining for critical minerals like lithium and cobalt. The large-scale production that is going to happen around the world, right, will also contribute to unaccounted greenhouse gas emissions. So switch to electric hybrid vehicles may not be the solution that we have always thought about, right? There could be other adverse side effects, and this may not be a sustainable path towards a clean, renewable, energy-fueled world. So this is where biofuels come into picture. Biofuels, which involve blending of ethanol into regular fuel sources, this could offer the right path going forward, according to the writer. See, as of now, biofuel blending is largely focused upon the first generation of biofuel. The first generation of biofuel is produced by using food crops like sugarcane, for example, or other food cereals. By using the molasses from sugarcane or by using other food grains, right? Through the process of fermentation and the related chemical processes, ethanol is produced, which is further blended with petrol and diesel to produce biofuel. This is the first generation biofuel. According to the writer, right now, India and the world, they are focused mainly on first generation biofuel, where we are using regular food crops to produce ethanol. Now, this path may not be entirely sustainable according to the writer. And the writer has a very valid point. Because if you're relying on food crops like sugarcane, right, then you're automatically promoting inefficiency and it is going to have a detrimental impact on the environment. Sugarcane is a highly water intensive crop. It leads to water wastage. It leads to overexploitation of the groundwater table. That is not environmentally sustainable. It will further contribute to degradation of the environment and further to climate change as well. So first generation biofuels have an inherent problem. The reliance on food crops like sugarcane and other food cereals, which are water intensive, may not be a sustainable path to achieve reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. India also has a program regarding this. We have a biofuel ethanol blending program, and India has set a target of 20% blending to be achieved by 2025-2026. And we are almost set to achieve the target. We will achieve 20% ethanol blending within the prescribed deadline. It definitely helps in bringing down emissions, right? But there would be other adverse effects on the environment, which makes this path not very sustainable as far as climate action is concerned. India also has a favorable policy towards sugar cultivation, right? We have remunerative prices, fair and remunerative price, which is announced for sugar crops. India is one of the world's largest producer of sugarcane and sugar. So we are driving more and more farmers. We are incentivizing them actually to cultivate more sugarcane. Yes, it is good for exports. It is good for food security as well. But you're not taking into account the environmental aspect, the environmental damage that's going to happen because these crops are extremely water intensive. And down the line, if you keep diverting food crops towards biofuel generation, right, this could compromise food security as well. It might lead to shortage of critical food grains because farmers will find the biofuel industry to be more lucrative. They might produce crops to sell to the biofuel industry to produce first generation biofuel instead of supplying it to the market. This could create a demand-supply mismatch causing inflation and rise in food prices, and it could directly affect food security. So these concerns exist with first generation biofuels. So this is where the writer says that the hope lies in second generation biofuel or 2G biofuel, where only crop residue and agri waste is used to produce ethanol. Is that clear? Instead of relying on food crops and using sugarcane and food grains, which are good for consumption, right? In second generation biofuel production, crop residue, agricultural waste, the food which is going to waste, that is being used to produce ethanol. The writer says this path is more sustainable. The writer says that this is the way forward. Governments need to promote second generation biofuel and its adoption to achieve reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Along with focus on switching to electric vehicles, parallelly, if we prioritize second generation biofuel, which is more sustainable because it does not harm the environment, right? It does not lead to overproduction of crops. It does not waste water. It does not lead to crisis in food security. Only food waste items, the agri residue and the waste crops, right, which are going to waste, they are being channeled here towards ethanol production, which creates a more sustainable model and could play a pivotal role in the long term in bringing down greenhouse gas emissions. So this is where the writer praises the Global Biofuel Alliance led by India and other countries. Under this initiative, the focus is on second generation biofuel, not on first generation biofuel. At the G20, the countries which launched this initiative along with India, they have recognized the harmful damage caused by first generation biofuel. So going forward, there will be priority given for second generation biofuels that are produced through crop residue and agricultural waste. So the writer says this is a more sustainable path, a more environment friendly path, which does not contribute to unaccounted greenhouse gas emissions, and it could help us switching towards clean renewable energy. All right. So this is the key argument being made by the writer in this column. Next, on page number 9, we have an article related to disaster management, where the writer focuses on flood risk management. As you know, we are witnessing more and more floods and flash floods in India and around the world. From northern parts of India, especially Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, to South Korea, to China, to Europe, right? Even Australia, in South America as well. We have seen several extreme weather events where there is extreme rainfall, cloud bursts, even cyclones. These extreme weather events, which have gone up in their frequency and their intensity, right, which is a result of climate change, it is causing more intense disasters today, especially flash floods. In today's newspaper itself, there is a mention of another flash flood in Libya. There has been a devastating flash flood in Libya where thousands of people have been killed, right? It was a result of an extreme weather event where there was a sudden heavy rainfall that flooded a major river that drains into the Mediterranean, and an entire city has been flooded, killing more than 5,000 people. The death count is expected to go up to 10 or 12,000. So given the impact of flash floods, the writer is pointing out that we should prioritize floodplain management under disaster management. See, in India, disaster management is guided by the Disaster Management Act of 2005. The DM Act lays down the disaster management cycle. There are 3 stages in this cycle where we focus on pre-disaster planning and preparedness. We prioritize during disaster response and relief. And there is focus on post-disaster management, where focus is given to reconstruction, recovery, and rehabilitation. So the Disaster Management Act definitely streamlined disaster management in India. It has given a more scientific approach and a better structured administrative response to deal with disasters. But the problem is, the Disaster Management Act, even though it talks about disaster risk and implements the Sendai framework into our disaster management policy and plan, it does not recognize the importance of floodplain management. With regard to floods, there is no focus under the Act and the policy and plan that we have adopted where we are prioritizing floodplain management. The writer says floodplain management is critical because there are many man-made factors, several anthropogenic factors which are contributing to more flash floods. Apart from the natural causes, there are several man-made causes that are aggravating the disaster. That is the core argument the writer is making. Now see, look at this graphic here. Flood is a situation that arises when the carrying capacity of a water body is overwhelmed. Correct? You take any water body, be it a lake, a wetland or river. Every water body, every drainage basin has a certain carrying capacity. Just like a bucket or a drum will have a certain carrying capacity, right? Once the carrying capacity is breached, that is when the excess water will spill out, causing the flood in the nearby areas, right? So the carrying capacity of a water body can be compromised due to various factors. Due to excessive rainfall, like a cloudburst event, this might bring a heavy volume of water in that catchment area, and the carrying capacity of the drainage basin might get overwhelmed and the excess water will spill out, causing a sudden flood. This could happen naturally as well. Now, for example, you take a bucket with 5-liter carrying capacity and you suddenly pour 10 liters of water into it. Obviously, the excess water will spill out, causing a flood. There's another reason why the carrying capacity can be compromised. If there are blockages, if the water channel, if the catchment area where the water body is flowing through, where the water is accumulating, right? If those channels are blocked due to some reason, even this reduces the carrying capacity of the water body. Now, take the same example, take that bucket with 5-liter carrying capacity. Imagine you have filled half the bucket with sand. Half the carrying capacity is gone. So now it can hold only 2.5 liters of water instead of 5. So even if I pour only 3 liters of water, right, which is well within its carrying capacity, still the excess half liter will spill out, causing a flood, because its carrying capacity has diminished due to blockages. The same is happening in our water bodies as well, especially due to illegal land encroachment. Due to rapid, unplanned urbanization, we have taken over key water channels, right? We have taken over and blocked key catchment basins. And you can see these examples in Indian cities itself. You take Chennai, for example, even Bengaluru, right? Delhi, most recently, Srinagar. All these cities have experienced flooding during monsoons. And most of them have been labeled as a man-made disaster. These are classic cases of urban flooding. And studies have pointed out that it's not just excess rainfall which caused the flood. The floods were aggravated in their intensity, their frequency and impact, mainly because of blockages. Because the catchment areas have been blocked, the water body has been blocked, where key catchment areas have been occupied by the real estate mafia. We have built cities, we have built malls, apartment complexes on these waterbeds, on lakes, on river channels. So obviously when there is rainfall during the monsoon season, right, Since the carrying capacity is compromised, the water spills out, causing a flood in the nearby region. Not just in cities, even in remote areas of Uttarakhand, we are seeing the same phenomena. Due to exploitative tourism, due to the failure to follow the land regulation, right? The land use is regulated. Different zones are identified under disaster planning, and in high-risk zones, construction is not allowed. But still, due to lack of enforcement of these rules, due to the corrupt nexus between local governments and the real estate mafia, such encroachments are allowed to happen. Right? Illegal layouts come up, illegal resorts and homestays come up, right on the catchment basin and the riverbed. And later when the river floods during the rainy season, we complain that it's a natural disaster. So these are not exactly natural disasters. These are man-made disasters. There is a man-made contribution which is aggravating the impact of the natural disaster. So this is the core argument the writer is making. He is pointing out that we should focus on these illegal encroachments which have entered the riverbed and the drainage basin. If you contain them, if you restrict such illegal construction, clear those encroachments, you can effectively tackle floods. There are examples to show this. There are successful examples in Europe especially, where countries like France, Germany and others, they have focused on floodplain management as part of disaster risk management. In India, when we say disaster risk management, right, under the Sendai framework, we have largely focused on containment measures, how to contain flood waters from affecting habited areas. That has been the focus. So we focus on creating barriers, embankments and retention walls to prevent the flood waters from reaching the populated areas. That measure alone is not enough. We are just focusing on containing the disaster. How about preventing it altogether? If you have to focus on prevention under disaster risk, then we have to clear the illegal encroachments that are blocking the flow of water in the floodplains. Right? So that is what the writer is pointing out. He says that there should be a change in our disaster management approach to provide for floodplain management where we clear these illegal encroachments, not just in our cities, but across drainage basins and catchment areas, so we can minimize the impact of such disasters. All right? So now we come to the last article, the last big column on page number 10. After that, we'll take up few prelims articles. This column here is again related to climate change. Today, we actually have a number of articles related to environment and ecology. The article focuses on the global Stocktake report that was recently published by the UN's Climate Secretariat. One of the key climate secretariat bodies of the UN has published the global Stocktake report that highlights the progress the world has made towards achieving the goals of Paris Agreement. It's a collection of reports. There are 3 reports in this series. Collectively, they are called the global Stocktake report. So let us see what are the key findings of this report and what this report is all about. In 2015, I'm sure most of you know that, through the Paris Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention, that is the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention to Combat Climate Change, a climate agreement was agreed upon, which is popularly known as the Paris Agreement, that replaced the Kyoto Protocol of 1997. Under the Paris Agreement, instead of providing binding targets like the Kyoto Protocol did, Paris Agreement provided for voluntary contributions. See, previously under Kyoto Protocol, which was the binding climate change agreement, specific emission reduction targets were assigned to developed countries and industrialized countries, which are largely responsible for historical emissions. That approach didn't work because it led to a lot of divisions between the developed countries and developing nations. Developed countries would push the blame towards developing nations like India and China. They wouldn't take up ownership for historical responsibilities. Developing nations like India, China, Brazil and others, they would put the pressure back on developed nations, asking them to take up historical responsibilities. So the divisions had derailed our global efforts towards tackling climate change. So Kyoto Protocol was largely ineffective. So this was replaced with Paris Agreement in 2015 that provided for voluntary contributions. Instead of prescribing binding targets, set targets for countries, countries were allowed to come out with their own INDCs, or just known as NDCs, intended nationally determined contributions, which means every country could voluntarily come out with its own national targets. All right? So INDC stands for intended nationally determined contributions. So accordingly, all the countries, including India, announced their set of climate action targets known as nationally determined contributions, and they have been pursuing these targets, trying to achieve them by reducing emissions. So they are focused on switching to clean renewable energy, from solar to wind to electric, right? The switch is being made around the world, including India. Along with reducing emissions, there is focus on bringing emissions down in agriculture sector, focus on tackling deforestation and promoting afforestation, right? So this has been the approach of most of the countries, and today we are expected to take stock of where we stand. Because under the Paris Agreement, countries had agreed to conduct a periodic review to take stock of all the efforts that have been made in the last 5 years. So first set of targets were implemented from 2015 to 2020. So this required a stocktake. Now a new set of targets were brought out in 2020. So this requires a stocktake again, meaning a review, a periodic review to see where we stand, what is the progress we have made. Are we on track to achieve our eventual target? The final target is to keep the global rise in temperatures to less than 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. And in a best case scenario, to bring it down, to keep the rise in temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. This ambitious target has been set because any temperature rise beyond this would lead to irreversible climate change. So this ambitious target has been set, and in order to achieve this, studies have shown that we need to reduce emissions by 23 billion tons of CO2 every year. The goal should be to achieve carbon neutrality by the middle of the century, to achieve net zero emissions. Paris Agreement has provided for net zero emissions by 2050. Most developed nations like US, countries from European Union, they've all set ambitious goals by 2045, 2050 to achieve net zero emissions. Whereas others like India, China, they have set their own targets. India has set 2070 as a deadline for achieving net zero emissions. China has set a target for 2060. So as the world is progressing towards reducing emissions and achieving net zero emissions, it's important to know where we stand. Have we really taken up genuine efforts? Are the efforts really contributing to reduction in emissions? Right? These findings in the Global Stocktake report helps us understand that. It uses various parameters based on which we understand where we stand today with regard to progress regarding the commitments we have made under Paris Agreement. This report will play an important role for upcoming climate change summits. For example, this year's Conference of Parties, the COP Summit of Climate Change Convention, is being held in Dubai. It's being hosted by United Arab Emirates. So the findings here can give us a valuable feedback on where we need to make corrections, where the changes have to be made, where improvements have to be done. Right? So that is why the Global Stocktake report is very, very important. It's a very important UN document. The latest voluntary targets that were given out in 2020, right? They are not clearly enough. The findings of the report clearly shows that the targets that were announced and the progress we have made in the last few years is not enough. We are missing the opportunity. But at this rate, we are not going to achieve the goal of Paris Agreement, right? We'll see a substantial rise in temperatures where climate change becomes irreversible. So such findings, where you take stock, where you conduct a review to identify the shortcomings, it could help us set higher targets, more ambitious targets before the next goals are announced by 2025. The next set of NDCs will be announced in 2025 under Paris Agreement. So these findings of the Global Stocktake report will help the countries to know where they stand. So 17 parameters have been used to figure out that we are not progressing as we planned. There is very bad news from this report. despite all the hype surrounding Paris Agreement and its goals and all the voluntary contributions countries have announced, the report is showing that we are not making enough progress. We are way off the path. It's not that we are just missing the target. We are way away from the target because there is an emission gap of around 20 billion tons according to the report. The UN emissions gap report that estimates the gap between the set target and the actual reduction in emissions shows a massive gap in emissions that we are releasing. According to Paris goals, we should have brought down emissions by 23 billion tons of CO2. But we are cutting emissions only by 2 to 3 billion tons, which is a difference of 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide. So clearly we are nowhere close to achieving the targets, which means we are headed towards a very bleak future. So this is where the Stocktake report helps us. It is urging the countries to raise their targets to achieve 43% emission reduction by the end of the decade, or else we are going to fall behind. This should be raised to 60% by 2035, and most countries should achieve carbon neutrality by the middle of the century. If we don't stick to the targets, we will miss the goal that has been set under Paris Agreement, and climate change is for sure going to become irreversible. That is why the Global Stocktake report is crucial as part of climate change negotiations. It is critical as part of the Paris Agreement because it allows us a periodic review. It allows us to know where we stand, what progress we have made, where we should make corrections. Is that clear? So with this, I conclude my detailed discussion of all the big articles and columns. Now we can proceed to the prelims section where we take a quick look at the smaller articles in today's newspaper. On the first page itself, we have an article referring to the special session of the Parliament that has been called by the Government of India. The Government of India surprised everyone by notifying a special session which is going to be held from September 18th to 22nd. There was also a lot of rumors and suspicion regarding what bills will be tabled, what issues will be discussed. Finally, these rumors have been addressed by the government. Yesterday, the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha bulletins have been published. This is how the Parliament updates the MPs and the public regarding what business will be conducted in the upcoming session. Right? So the bulletins of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha make it clear that the session has been called to discuss the achievements of the Indian Parliament in the last 75 years. It marks a major milestone, right? In the 75th year of Indian independence, the government is commemorating the Amrit Kal initiative, and it is bringing all the MPs together as part of the special session where the focus will be on discussing the progress, the achievements of the Parliament, the contributions of the Parliament. There might be a discussion on switching to the new Parliament building as well, because after the new Parliament was inaugurated, right, we still haven't made a switch from the old Parliament. So these issues might be discussed. Along with that, some important bills are going to be tabled, right? This will come up in news in the next week. Now, let us understand what exactly is a special session. Who can call such a special sitting? How often does the Parliament meet? Let's cover these basics, right? Because once the session gets underway from September 18th, then we'll get to know what bills are being discussed, what issues are being brought up. Then we can cover them. Now let's focus on what is a special session of the Parliament. Is it provided in the Constitution? What are the norms here regarding Parliament sittings and sessions? See, according to the Constitution, there is no fixed calendar. It's not that specific dates and months are given by the Constitution itself regarding Parliament sessions. This was provided by a Lok Sabha committee in 1955. In 1955, a Lok Sabha committee, a parliamentary committee, charted the schedule, the yearly schedule, and accordingly, we have a budget session that happens, right? The budget session, usually from February till June, May. Then you have a monsoon session from July to almost August, September. Followed by this, there will be a winter session at the end of the year, from November to December. So in a calendar year, usually 3 parliamentary sessions are held. This has been the practice since 1955. This schedule was brought out by the Lok Sabha committee. Now, who decides when the Parliament has to meet? When the session will begin? Who summons the House? Right? It is the Government of India which has the discretion to determine the exact date and duration of these sessions. the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and the Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs takes the primary call. The Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs is one of the most powerful committees that decides the business of the Parliament. So it consists of 10 important cabinet ministers, including the Parliament Affairs Minister. Right? There is representation for the Defense Minister, Home Minister, Tribal Affairs, Agriculture Minister, and other key ministers are involved. Even Law Minister and the MOS for External Affairs are also invited as special invitees to this Cabinet Committee. So this committee comes out with the exact schedule, the date, duration of the sessions. Once the exact schedule is decided by the government, right, this is left to the discretion of the government. So this final schedule is brought out by the Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, and then the government informs the President. The government informs the President of India because President of India is the one who has the powers to summon the House. There is an article in the Constitution that provides this power to the President. Now please find out which article this is and mention that article in the comments below. The President has the powers to summon the House, so the schedule is given by the government to the President, and the President accordingly summons the House. Apart from these regular sessions, apart from the budget, monsoon and winter session, special sittings can also be called, special sessions can also be called in a similar manner. If any important issue has to be discussed, or if a milestone has to be marked, if key legislations have to be brought in which requires urgent intervention, then government has the authority to recommend to the President to summon the House for a special session, and accordingly the President will call for the session. Now if you look at the Constitution does not specify anything called the special session. Alright? The Constitution says, however, that the maximum gap between two sessions should not be more than 6 months. The maximum gap between two sessions cannot be more than 6 months. This is a criteria prescribed by the Constitution of India. But however, the term special session itself has not been used in the Constitution. Right? The term itself is not mentioned directly in the Constitution. You don't have an explicit mention of this. So government reserves the discretion for itself to convene these sessions, to discuss key issues, mark milestones, so it can notify the President, and President will summon the House according to the constitutional provisions. However, under Article 352 that deals with national emergency, the word special sitting of the House has been used. This was added through the 44th Amendment Act in 1978 following the national emergency. Because during the national emergency of 1975, some of the provisions of Article 352 were seen to be misused by the then Indira Gandhi government. So to build checks and balances against the misuse of the emergency provision, several changes were made through the 44th Amendment. And one change that was introduced was the power of the Lok Sabha MPs to call for a special sitting of the House, where they can ask the President to convene a special meeting to disapprove the emergency if they are opposed to it. But it requires the support of 1/10 of MPs from Lok Sabha. Now let's say Parliament is not in session and the government has proclaimed an emergency under its powers of Article 352. Right? And if MPs don't agree with it, if 1/10 of the MPs support this opposition to the emergency, they can ask the President to convene a special sitting of the House. This provision was added as a checks and balance measure through the 44th Amendment. So through the special sitting, they can disapprove the emergency, which will push the government to revoke the national emergency. Alright? So this is where you find a mention of special sitting of the House, but special session itself is not mentioned in the Constitution. Next, on page 9, we have an important article related to geography and disaster management. The Hindu carries an infographic depicting some of the most powerful, deadliest earthquakes that the world has seen. Because recently we have seen many major earthquakes, right? Just few days back, Morocco was devastated by a massive earthquake. In the last few months, there have been major earthquakes in Mexico, in South America, in Italy and Greece as well, right? So there have been devastating earthquakes, and this infographic is exploring the most powerful earthquakes that have been registered. Now, if you look at the map here, you can notice a pattern. You can notice that most of the powerful earthquakes are concentrated in certain belts. In this belt, from Alaska to the west coast of North America to Central America to the west coast of South America. And on the opposite side, in East Asia, in North Pacific, from Japan to Korea, China, Southeast Asia, covering Philippines and Indonesia, then the South Pacific Islands, like Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Vanuatu and others. Now, if you look at the globe, if you look at the earth, right, if you invert this map, you will notice that this is almost like a circle, like a ring. This belt where most of the earthquakes is being registered, the most powerful earthquakes are being seen, it forms like a ring, and this is called the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's a region of intense tectonic activity. The tectonic plates are in constant movement. There are multiple subduction zones, multiple locations where the tectonic plates are moving apart, slipping under each other. So it's a very active tectonic zone, and as a result, this region is a hub of earthquakes and as well as volcanoes. These geophysical activities are very intense in this region. It's called the Pacific Ring of Fire. Similarly, you can notice one more region if you pay attention. You can notice this belt from southern Europe in the Mediterranean, covering parts of North Africa as well. It covers Italy, the Alp mountain ranges, Greece, Cyprus. It extends towards Turkey, Iran and West Asia, where the African plate meets with the Arabian plate and the Anatolian plate, right? From here it extends towards Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Hindu Kush and the Himalayan belt, towards India, Nepal until Myanmar. This belt is again a hub of massive earthquakes. This is called the Alpine Himalayan belt. This is another major tectonic zone. There are multiple plates that are in constant movement. For example, the Indian plate diving under the Eurasian plate. The African Arabian plate colliding with the Anatolian plate that caused the mega earthquake in Turkey a few months back, right? So this is another major zone of earthquakes, the Alpine Himalayan belt. The other one is Pacific Ring of Fire. So please be aware of these two zones. Pacific Ring of Fire witnesses the most earthquakes and intense volcanic activity, followed by the Alpine Himalayan belt. Now let's move on to the next article. On page number 8, we have an article referring to the C-295 transport aircraft that India is procuring from Spain. The Indian Air Force is looking to replace its old and aging Avro transport aircraft, and we have ordered 56 C-295 aircraft, which is produced by Airbus. It's one of the biggest defense contracts we have signed with Spain and Airbus. It's a multi-billion-dollar deal, and the Indian Air Force is all set to receive the first batch of the aircraft. So the Chief of the Indian Air Force is in Spain to receive the first transport aircraft. Some of the other aircraft in this batch will be directly provided by Spain. Airbus will produce some of them in Spain itself, and it will directly hand them over to Indian Air Force. But the rest of it, the rest of the aircraft will be produced domestically through a partnership with Tata Advanced Systems, where a factory has been set up in Gujarat. At Vadodara in Gujarat, Airbus is setting up a production factory with Tata Advanced Systems Limited, where indigenous production of the aircraft will happen. These transport aircrafts, they have tremendous advantages. They provide airlift capability to the Indian Air Force. They can carry troops, they can paradrop commandos, they can carry military equipment and supplies. They can land on semi-prepared runways and take off in very short runways. So, in providing logistical support to forward areas and in assisting war efforts at the front lines, such transport aircraft will be critical. So C-295 is going to replace the Avro transport aircraft, which is an outdated aircraft right now. All right, so this is one small development you should make a note of. Next, on the same page, we have an article referring to a UN convention to deal with cyber crimes. It's an upcoming convention. The UN has brought out the draft to deal with cyber crimes. This is the first global convention to deal with cyber crimes. Currently, we don't have a global convention on these lines through the UN. However, there is one more convention dealing with cyber crimes. It's called the Budapest Convention. The Budapest Convention is limited in its range, its reach and scope. It's brought out by the Council of Europe. And India is not part of Budapest Convention. We are not a signatory to it. All right? India is not a signatory to Budapest Convention that currently deals with cybercrimes. It primarily involves Western countries, European countries and other Western countries. So right now the UN is pursuing a global convention to deal with all types of cybercrimes, which has become an emergent threat. So India is also part of these negotiations. We are working closely with the United Nations to finalize the draft of this UN convention, and it is likely to be adopted next year in 2024. So in this regard, we have some concerns. India has some concerns. They have been raised by the Ministry of Home Affairs because MHA is the nodal ministry here when it comes to dealing with cyber crimes. Right? It's part of internal security. So the MHA has thoroughly reviewed the draft UN Cybercrime Convention, and it has raised a concern regarding provisions related to transfer of personal data. Because India has recently enacted the Digital Personal Data Protection Act to govern the transfer of personal data. Now, if the UN Convention is brought out and if India signs and ratifies the UN Convention, we might be obligated to include UN provisions into our national law. So India has suggested that when it comes to transfer of personal data outside the country, domestic laws have to apply instead of UN treaty. This is a suggestion India has provided because India wants to establish the primacy of Indian law and Indian jurisdiction when it comes to transfer and handling of personal data. Is that clear? So this is a suggestion that India has made, and India will try to make few more changes in the draft before the UN Convention will be adopted. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this development. This is going to be a trending topic in the coming months. You might see that by next year, this convention might be adopted by the UN. It is going to be a very big topic, and we will have many discussions on this topic as well. So just pay attention to this development where India is already playing a role in the drafting process. We want to ensure that transfer of personal data is handled as per domestic law provisions and not according to UN convention, not according to the proposed UN treaty. Next, on page 14, there is an article referring to sickle cell disorder. Sickle cell, I hope you know, is a genetic blood disorder. It's an inherited disorder that passes genetically, and those who suffer from this condition, their red blood cells acquire a unique sickle shape. It acquires a C shape. Usually RBCs are spherical, circular in shape. But because of this genetic disorder, the RBCs get compressed. It acquires a C shape or a sickle shape. And this affects the oxygen carrying capacity of your red blood cells. It leads to several disorders including anemia, sickle cell anemia. It causes severe joint pain. It affects the functioning of various critical organs as well. So this becomes a lifelong or lifetime disease. It's a progressive degenerative disease which keeps affecting your body and your bodily functions. And few specific populations or few genetic makeup, they are more prone to the disease. Especially tribal communities in India are more prone to sickle cell disorder. So given its impact, given its chronic condition and lifelong progressive degenerative impact, India has set a target to eradicate sickle cell disease by 2047. We can ensure that future babies or fetuses that report the disorder can be terminated, or parents who might pass it on to their children, they might be suggested not to have children because they will end up with sickle cell disease. There are options available through which the genetic transfer can be prevented. India has set a target by 2047 to eradicate sickle cell disorder. So right now, those who are existing patients, right, they are suffering from a lifelong disability. As I told you, it's a lifelong condition and it keeps progressing. It becomes worse and worse. It's chronic and it becomes a lifelong disorder. So under the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016, sickle cell disease is recognized as a physical disability. And accordingly, the patients have to be given a disability certificate so they can enjoy the benefits that are given to disabled patients. But in this regard, there has been a bureaucratic challenge, administrative challenge. Because there are multiple ministries involved here. There is Health Ministry setting the criteria. based on which patients are classified as sickle cell patients, which decides their eligibility to get a disability certificate. Tribal Affairs Ministry is also involved in determining how the tribal community is given the disability certificate. Then finally, Social Justice Ministry. The Social Justice and Empowerment Ministry plays a role in providing benefits to provide social justice to these patients, right? To provide special advantages to the patients affected by sickle cell disorder. So there is a lack of coordination between different ministries. There have been delays in issuing the certificates. Sometimes the certificates are given only for 1 year or 3 years, whereas the disorder is lifelong. It is lifetime disability. Even though it has been recognized under the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, the certificate being given by the authorities is only for 1 or 3 years, right? So there are many challenges being faced here in implementing this policy, where we are recognizing sickle cell disorder as a disability and trying to help the patients. So that is what the article is highlighting. Now coming to the last article, on the same page, we have another health related scheme, a new scheme which has been launched. President of India has launched the Ayushman Bhav Health Campaign. Ayushman Bhav Health Campaign. This health campaign is focused on delivering healthcare services to the last mile, to the remotest of places, to the grassroots, in order to make healthcare accessible and affordable, especially to the underserved regions and underserved populations. So remote rural areas, far away locations, unconnected areas, which have been deprived of quality healthcare, which do not have good primary healthcare centers at the ward and panchayat level. They are the focus of this new initiative called Ayushman Bhav Health Campaign. The focus here is to provide accessible, affordable healthcare at the grassroots and reach out to the last mile, the last villages, right? The last gram sabhas, and serve the underserved population and the communities and provide quality healthcare at this level. So gram panchayats will play a critical role in implementing this scheme. And those gram panchayats which achieve 100% coverage, which achieve universal coverage in their jurisdiction, they will be recognized as Ayushman Gram Panchayats. They will be declared as Ayushman Gram Panchayats. So the goal here is to achieve universal health coverage and expand health coverage to the remotest of places and serve all the underserved regions and communities. So please make a note of this new scheme that has been launched. So on this note, I would like to conclude my discussion for today. Please take up these 2 questions for your answer writing practice. Post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which link is given in the description box below. And I expect all of you to write good answers, because we have discussed both the topics in detail. I have given you all the necessary points to build a structured answer for these questions. So I hope it was a good session. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you guys understood all the topics. Now please head to our Telegram channel. You have a quiz on these topics. You can revise these articles again, and we can meet tomorrow. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.